English translation, 873rd Contact Sunday, 24th of December 2023, 2:54 HRs.
Hello, dear friend. You are early again today. But welcome and greetings.
Good morning, Edward, my friend. Yes, I am here early, but the time is not important to you because
You are right. Besides, I have been awake for a good 20 minutes.
I realized that, which is also why I called you at such an early hour. I have also noticed that Kunio is already over there cleaning the bathrooms and toilets.
Yes, that is normal, because he is also an early riser. He is often at work early when I have to go to the toilet at 3 o'clock from the office, when I get up at 2 or so. This has always been my habit, even as a boy, and so in the 1940s I also noticed at around 2 o'clock in the morning when the Americans thundered past with their bombers and fighter planes at low altitude and then bombed Schweinfurt and Regensburg in Germany. I can still remember it well, because I was sitting at the sewing machine in the early hours of the morning sewing shirts, while my father and mother slept in the next room, and my siblings slept in the children's room. When I looked out of the window, I even saw the pilot of a fighter plane. However, there was no air alarm as usual, as this was probably wisely avoided for almost 2 hours, during which American aeroplanes thundered past at low altitude. The vaunted Swiss air defense was probably well informed about this and did nothing, also when the Americans bombed certain targets in Zurich and Schaffhausen.
I am aware of that, because it is recorded in Svath's annals. But I also know some things about it from Simya Se, including that you were with her at the Bermuda Triangle, which I have read some things about and am interested in, and indeed you were also there with Svath, as he wrote. There were some things that happened in connection with the foreigners, which was not commonplace, which I want to talk to you about.
We can do that later. Bermuda, the whole thing there is not extraterrestrial, as fantasists claim, because the disappearance of the planes and ships, small and huge, is due to natural processes, namely magnetic disturbances, magnetic anomalies, which cause the aircraft's instruments to go haywire and mislead the pilots. When ships disappear, it is usually the case, with the exception of other but natural occurrences, that rogue waves, that is to say monster waves, sweep the ships into the depths of the seas. I saw with Simya Se when, out of nowhere, in bright sunshine and with no clouds in the sky, a giant storm suddenly arose and created a huge wave which, as Simya Se had measured, was 43 meters high, and tore a giant transport ship into the depths of the sea. According to Simya Se, it was no longer even possible for the ship's radio operator to send out a distress call. Everything happened so quickly that it was almost impossible to follow what had happened. But that really had nothing to do with the foreigners and the strange gate, which I will tell you about then.
And if you do not want to talk about that now, I want to put your article in your computer now, which you wrote almost 2 years ago, and which Ptah photographed and presented to our peoples, and which was well received by them.
I have long forgotten about that one. But if you want, you can paste it into the computer, after which I can also reproduce it in the conversation report when I call it up and write it down. Go ahead, the machine is...
Good, that is about it.
But that was quick. If our technology was that advanced...
I would like to say, fortunately, not yet. But today, I want to help you when you call up our conversation and write it down, which will be saved with us first.
You are right about the technology. But thank you for adding the article. And it is probably good if you are there when I call up the conversation and write it down. Because then it goes better, and I only have to make corrections and not go to war with writing and correcting. But thank you again for posting the article.
Life and peace demand that neither weapons nor other things be produced and used for war, murder, and torture, etc., neither for hatred, revenge and retribution, nor also for any other violence of any kind, nor for destruction, annihilation, and extermination, because they are never a way to create true peace, freedom, law, and order, but only means to create discord, unfreedom, disaster, and multiple death with them.
Every war is unjust. Also, when one party is in the right and defends itself against the breach of promise of another party and wrongly defends itself with war. Every war is to be condemned, for it can never be justified, especially not by logic, understanding, and reason, for war automatically triggers counter-war, whereby violence again creates violence, as has been the custom of human beings on Earth since time immemorial, and primarily through the military, which is truly the greatest criminal evil of earthly humanity and which has never been justified since its existence, just as the military must have no right to exist, especially in this day and age. Since time immemorial, the military has been a guild of murderers organized against human lives, killing, murdering, raping, torturing, and destroying without restraint, against every law of life and its order, against every human right, international law, and every respect, honor, and dignity of human beings. This has been the case since time immemorial, just as it has never had a right to exist since time immemorial. This is just like the atomic bombs and all nuclear weapons of all kinds, which not only threaten the entire Earth's humanity, but even jeopardize the existence of the planet Earth itself. In addition to the monstrosity that results in the murder of human beings and the destruction of human achievements, there are also the antagonists on the side of the warmongers, who constantly and irresponsibly set fire to the warring parties, who use lies and fraudulent statements to incite the whole world, and claim that they are using or intend to use certain internationally defined and banned weapons and other means in the war until they actually do so, because the constant agitation is simply too much for them. In this manner, what the warmongering party hopes for becomes reality, so that internationally outlawed weapons and means are used and the war degenerates all the more. The military has nothing to do with peacemaking, nor with self-defense, which requires controlled gavolt and goes far beyond the instinct of self-preservation and requires a special approach. Different laws apply to self-defense than to the instinct of self-preservation. The latter requires controlled gavolt, which alone can still protect life and save it from death. Self-defense not only fully requires sound logic, crystal clear reason, and tangible, sober, and insightful reason, but also its resolute and consistent implementation with a commitment to life. War is a work of death, like the death penalty, which corresponds to any protection of life and is therefore unjust. War, the death penalty, as well as murder and manslaughter, not only shamefully violate the rules of the right to life of every creature, every human right and international law, but war and the death penalty also turn the human beings who practice them into murderers and mass murderers. Moreover, war victimizes innocent people and senselessly destroys human achievements through damage and destruction, while guilty people such as criminals and murderers are executed, whereby gavolt is repaid with counter-gavolt and revenge is exacted. To avoid war, true logic, understanding, and reason must never be forgotten, but only human beings are capable of these values, who do not ignore suggestions, possibilities, and warnings in the run-up to a quarrel and in the case of accusations and disputes, etc., but consider them carefully and clarify them through mutual conversation. However, this takes time, indeed a lot of time, and patience, and this patience must not be put to the test or lost. One way or another, a mutually acceptable consensus must always be found that is satisfactory to all sides, and thus actually ensures peace and avoids war. But this is effectively only possible through the use of sober logic, common sense, and plain reason, which must be inherent in human beings as a whole. However, if this is not part of a human being's independence, sovereignty, self-government, and self-legislation, then on the one hand, he himself betrays his inability to make decisions, give orders and take action, and he thereby proves that on the one hand he is classified as a non-thinker, and on the other hand that he is only capable of making decisions, actions and deeds on impulse, which do not necessarily correspond to well-considered decisions, orders and actions, but rather to emotional degenerations. True knowledge and wisdom, especially with regard to what true peace is, must avoid any cause of war, because peace alone guarantees the valuable progress of individual human beings and humanity as a whole. This also ensures that human beings, through their logic, clear understanding and necessary reason, realize that every overpopulation of earthly peoples constantly promotes more and more discord and acts of war, instead of putting an end to them and avoiding further spirals of escalation. In a war, everyone loses, just as war itself also threatens nuclear war today, and it is completely irrelevant who feels or proclaims to be the winner. The wounded, the refugees, the dead and their graves, the ruins of destroyed human achievements are always witnesses to the madness, the insanity, and the senselessness of every war. The main victims are always the human beings and their achievements, in which they have put their labor and efforts. The consequences affect the entire population of the country in which the war is fought, but it also affects the peoples of the state from which the war originates. And ultimately it affects the humanity of the whole world, because as a rule, everyone is partisan. But as a rule, there are 2 to 4 different schools of thought in all parties and groups themselves, through which one is then emphasized, and by persuading the others and those below it, everything is then brought into line and decided. In addition, sanctions are imposed by the top echelons of the government, which are imposed in an unbiased manner against the guilty parties deemed to be in favor of the war, whereby it is not the guilty parties who are hit, but the populations and the economy. In every war, international law is trampled underfoot. Any peace order and the order of civil society is forcibly lost. The costs of war alone destroy the hopes that peace can be achieved after the war, because then come the reparation payments for the losers of the war. Consequently, these enormous sums, which, over many years and decades, have to be paid to the victors, naturally have consequences. The conditions for a sustainable peace are made tougher by the payments, and thus the solution for a peaceful life after the war becomes a problem, because for many states and their inhabitants, these payments mean poverty and hunger, even expulsion from their homeland, because they must inevitably leave it if they do not want to starve. Then there is the environmental destruction caused by the war, which over time, like a nuclear war, can constantly bring about the end of humanity, nature, and its fauna and flora, the atmosphere, or even the entire planet. The victims are not only human beings, but also the truth, because war propaganda dominates all populations of every state to the extent that the beams bend, not because of what is real, but because of the lies that become loud, but also because of the deception that is carried out, because everything is presented differently than it really is. The exuberant misinformation of warfare erases previous knowledge that is needed for the future, as a result of which the new things to come cannot be built in the form of true peace, which inevitably leads sooner or later to violence and counter-violence, and thus to new acts of war. Hardly anyone ever asks how acts of war actually and genuinely come about, because hardly anyone really thinks, but simply believes everything that is mendaciously and deceitfully parroted. What is really true and corresponds to the full truth is not questioned one iota, because it is believed in exactly the same way as religious belief has already been hammered in against logic, understanding and reason, and has become so firmly established as a delusion that only in the rarest of cases will a human being think and decide for himself freely, self-reflectively, self-decisively, self-acting, and free from any belief, as well as fully consciously, objectively, and responsibly. However, an incompetent leader who has fueled the escalation spiral over decades or his entire life, as many do, especially powerful people who head the state, the authorities, a religious community, the family, a company, a corporation, or any other group of human beings, is at a very high risk of no longer living as a humane and correct thinking, deciding, ordering, and acting being, because his behavior in power has impaired his healthy senses and damaged them to such an extent that logic, understanding, and reason have become completely foreign to him. Earthly humanity is constantly on the threshold of war, and when it wants to turn away from it, some idiot full of hatred, revenge, retaliation, and lust for power comes along and crosses the threshold, and war, murder, manslaughter, and destruction are the order of the day again. If human beings really want peace, they must stop all armaments and military interventions and abolish all military forces and thus all armies. These undermine any endeavor to create peace because they are only geared towards gavolt, murder, and destruction, but not towards creating real peace. Every military breaks international law in a war and is an ineffective mediator and counselor for peaceful solutions in any warlike relationship. Many states and countless human beings provide partisan assistance and support wars and terror by supplying the belligerents or defenders with weapons for murder and destruction and all sorts of other things, also openly and maliciously condemning some and wishing them to hell, while praising others to the skies. And if we are talking about do-gooders in this respect, they are the very people who make big statements such as never act according to the meaning of do unto me as I do unto thee, repay like with like, violence creates counter-violence, violence creates violence. If you do not want to be my brother, I will smash your head in, or no one can live in peace if the evil neighbor does not like it. The most pious person cannot live in peace if the person of a different faith does not like it, etc. All the do-gooders pretend to be fighters against evil and act like saints against their fellow human beings. But as a rule, it is all just lies and deceit, because if they themselves are affected by violence, injustice, or other harm being done to them, they always change their behavior in a flash. Their words of good behavior suddenly vanish like the wind in the desert, meaning that all the good and peaceful words they have spoken are quickly forgotten. Immediately, only uncontrolled self-defense in the form of violence against foreign aggression comes into play, such as brawling, hatred, murder and manslaughter, as well as destruction, etc. Driven by self-defense, anger, hatred, and wild retaliatory rage, revenge and satisfaction grow when the aggressive opponent is incapacitated. Everything goes very far beyond what self-defense requires, which arises from the need to protect and preserve one's own or another's life from death and consequently justifies the use of controlled violence. With the onset of aggression on the part of the other person, the degenerations stored deep in the character and lurking, such as revenge, retaliation, and hatred, very quickly awaken and rapidly double and triple, as a result of which all self-control is lost and everything degenerates. Everything can no longer be fought because a state of loss of self-control arises in a flash, resulting in nothing coming out of it in the future that would contribute to something better coming out of it. And so the whole of the evil depths of character remain. There is no cure for forgetting the evil qualities of hatred, revenge, and retaliation that lurk deep within the character, which are present in practically every good person despite their good talking and glossing over. These can only be dissolved and neutralized by working on them consciously and with full awareness, and by maintaining and exercising control over them in every situation. However, this is not the case with do-gooders, Just as it is not the case with human beings in general, who do not care at all about the evil emotional aberrations lurking deep within their character because they are not aware of them. This inevitably leads to the fact that if physical aggressive attacks or just harassment occur from the outside through any circumstances or persons, the emotional degenerations lurking deep in the character break through to the outside in a matter of seconds, and self-defense in the form of hatred, war, retaliation, and violence breaks out. As a result of the failure to utilize thought, logic, understanding, and reason, this inevitably leads to alternating violence and counter-violence, and not infrequently to murder and manslaughter, instead of peace and an end to the aggression with reasonable words. This is done in particular by the military, which is drilled to spread aggression, and thus violence as well as murder, torture and destruction, regardless of the fact that through this and through murder, rape, torture, destruction, and ultimate victory, no true peace can be created and no real peace will ever emerge. Wars must be prevented, and further wars of all kinds must not be activated. And this applies to political wars fought by military armies, killing human lives, and destroying human achievements. This must be prevented, if only by banning the manufacture and supply of weapons or military action. Economic wars that fuel a spiral of escalation often also lead to war, so these must also be banned. Sanctions imposed by states on other states should also be banned, as these do not affect those in power who order wars and send the military to carry out mass murder and destruction, but the respective population. In any case, humanitarian aid for victims of Gayvault is to be supported, as is the establishment and expansion of links between peace movements that mobilize to end wars on the one hand and endeavor to prevent wars on the other, as are movements that endeavor to bring the military conduct of earthly humanity to a standstill through logic, understanding, and reason, and to generally dissolve the military in all states of the world. This must be promoted in all areas of society, and the authoritarian structures of militarism must be dissolved, so it is important to support movements that are involved in this peace work. However, it should be emphasized that it is not simply monetary donations that can solve this problem, but personality and involvement in the cause. Monetary donations should only be made where there is certainty that the full amount donated will be used for the good cause and that a certain percentage will not be written off as expenses and remuneration money, as is legally permitted by the begging organizations, which are allowed by law to collect around 40% for operating costs and remuneration costs. This means that at least 40% of every donation, that is to say almost half, goes into the pockets of the aid organizations to pay for operations and remuneration. However, this is not what donations should be used for, because every donation must be used for the purpose for which it is donated. Every state that engages in armament and war must become willing to create peace, because the world and its humanity need peace. Consequently, the states warmongering against each other must be replaced by an effective logic of peace. This must be achieved through effective diplomacy, the cessation of all existing and possible pending and imminent acts of war, a complete de-escalation and the withdrawal and complete destruction of all weapons. For this to happen, the protection and strengthening of international law between all parties to the conflict must be emphasized and constitutionally enshrined as a factor of lasting value, and must also be actively and effectively observed in all dealings between the various states. Only the creation of such a worldwide state regulation can bring about a turning point in time that will truly bring about a global architecture of peace that is then stable. This alone can bring about a turning point in time that will bring about a world that guarantees true global peace, which effectively ensures common security worldwide as well as sustainability and solutions to the problems of humanity on our planet Earth.
Simyase Silver Star Center 10.3. 221143 airs, Billy.
What you wrote last March is the fact of what is very necessary here on Earth, that it penetrates the consciousness of human beings.
That can be attempted, but there is not much hope of this succeeding, because Earthlings prefer to cling to religious belief and thus to an imaginary dear God, an imaginary Lord, who does not exist. Thinking for themselves is not required, only erroneous and imbecile faith. Earthlings prefer to be lied to and deceived by the religious leaders, but also by those in power in government, who fantasize about environmental protection, how destruction, etc., can be countered. This, instead of finally doing the correct thing, namely tackling and eliminating the evil of all evils by means of a worldwide controlled birth stop, and thus reducing the all-destructive overpopulation to just 500 million. But there are other problems that need to be fixed, which are also related to overpopulation. 3 days ago, I learnt a lot more about particulate matter, namely more details about what Svath had already explained to me. What I have now learnt again is what Svath already explained in part when we were talking about electric cars in the 1940s and what will happen when they arrive. What he explained then has now been confirmed, and what is known and what I have just learnt now is the following. Electric cars produce just as much particulate matter as modern petrol engines and diesel engines. For decades, the authorities have been tightening emissions regulations practically all over the world, which has now led to heavy electric cars being manufactured and put on the road. And this has happened and continues to happen with an unparalleled degree of deceitfulness on the part of the authorities and science. The fact that everything is being tightened up for passenger cars and lorries is unjustified because electric cars emit practically as much dirt into the air as petrol and diesel vehicles, which not only pollutes the atmosphere with CO2, but also with particulate matter, which is harmful to human beings, animals, creatures, and all life forms in general, and therefore also to all fauna and flora. Harmful because particulate matter, which is also caused by the spreading of manure in the open air, with the escape of manure ammonia and the combination with CO2 from petrol-diesel engines, which escapes into the air and thus impregnates it, causes serious illnesses through inhalation, with fatal consequences, not to mention respiratory problems in the form of respiratory congestion with long-term consequences, as well as cancers that cost many lives. Particulate matter corresponds to so-called PM10 particles, which have a diameter of less than 10,000ths of a millimeter, and PM2.5 particles, which have a diameter of less than 2.5 thousandths of a millimeter, and which enter the lungs of human beings, animals and fauna in general through breathing, just as all plants, that is to say all flora, absorb particulate matter. And how harmful this is for the individual life forms varies according to their resistance, but in any case, it can be harmful or even fatal. Human beings in particular, however, breathe in this particulate matter, and it is unavoidable, because the air pollution caused by electric vehicles is even higher, and the effective truth, which is vehemently denied and disputed by all those governments, scientists, manufacturers, and salespeople who can earn a profit in some wise by lying, deceiving, and misleading the people. These new petrol cars and lorries, as well as motorbikes and work machines, emit significantly fewer pollutants than the old ones, which also produces less particulate matter, which has decreased by around 30% since 1990, even though the number of all vehicles running on petrol or diesel oil has increased by a good 50% since then. Particulate matter is produced by the ammonia in manure that is spread, and combines with the CO2 formed by exhaust gases of all kinds, with the main sources of particulate matter also being private individuals, trade, and industry. In the private sector, it is wood fires, but mainly road traffic. There was once talk of hybrid drives for electric vehicles, whereby a hybrid drive, when in operation, also has an electric motor with a battery and an internal combustion engine. The main distinction here is between a full hybrid and a plug-in hybrid. Full hybrids are built in such a way that they charge the electric motor while driving, while plug-in hybrids also have a charging cable. Logically, electric vehicles do not emit any exhaust fumes, which means they also do not produce particulate matter. But particulate matter is not only a waste product of combustion engines, as it is also produced elsewhere, namely through tire wear and the use of brakes. However, particulate matter is also produced by the roads themselves, which are a very significant source and cause much more particulate matter than the vehicles themselves. The amount of particulate matter produced by a car depends on its weight, so the driving style of the car must also be taken into account, as well as the type of tires and brakes. But the surface of the road is also very important, as is the amount of dust on it, because this is stirred up when driving and spreads in the air, is inhaled by human beings and causes illness and suffering. So in this respect alone, electric cars are no better, which also makes it absolutely clear that electric cars do not solve the problem of particulate matter as a pathogen, nor do they prevent its particles from entering the bloodstream when inhaled. Although very little particulate matter is produced when braking, this is because a so-called recuperation brake is usually used. When this is activated, the engine stops driving the wheels, which means that the vehicle practically decelerates itself while traveling. Consequently, the motor acts as a generator and creates electricity from the kinetic, that is to say, moving energy of the still-moving wheels, which in turn charges the battery. However, because electric vehicles are much heavier than those with combustion engines and also have greater torque, their tires are a major source of particulate matter when accelerating. Electric vehicles with small batteries produce slightly less particulate matter than large vehicles, which is clear. Large cars with large batteries and a long range, on the other hand, produce more particulate matter than comparable cars with combustion engines due to their high weight and enormous acceleration. The smaller the particles of particulate matter are, the more harmful they are to the health of human beings who breathe them in, as the organism is unable to excrete them via the respiratory tract. As they are respirable, they can spread to the lymphatic system and into the bloodstream and trigger cardiovascular problems, as well as lung cancer, diabetes, respiratory distress, and other life-threatening respiratory diseases.
What you say is unfortunately fact, and this does not want to be accepted by Earth's humanity, although it really corresponds to the truth, and in such a way as you name and cite everything.
Yes, the whole thing really is like that, although those responsible do not really think about it logically, intelligently, and reasonably, but only superficially and even idiotically decide wrong things and do wrong and useless things. In addition, the people are being lied to and deceived by the majority of those in power and by the military, as these articles here, for example, prove, which Akim sent me, and which I have also included in a special timestamp from December.
Former NOAA Director, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. We are being visited by non-human intelligences, but we do not understand their technologies or their intentions. Andreas Muller, the 15th of December, 2023.
Former U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. Copyright, U.S. Navy, or public domain.
Washington, USA, as a U.S. Rear Admiral retired. Tim Gallaudet not only looks back on an impressive military career, he was also the director of the prestigious U.S. Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration NOAA under Trump. Gallaudet has also long been committed to the controlled disclosure of UFO knowledge in the USA and has not least confirmed the statements of UFO whistleblower David Grush and his credibility. In a recent interview, Gallaudet describes UFOs not only as the story of the century and is convinced of the reality of extraterrestrial visitors on Earth. In an interview with investigative journalist Ross Coulthart for the U.S. news channel News Nation, Gallaudet starts with impressive explanations.
We are being visited by non-human intelligences with technologies we understand as little as their intentions.
Read Tim Gallaudet's official biography on the U.S. Navy website here. In internal emails, he was informed as the Navy's chief scientist about the UFO sightings off the U.S. East Coast in 2015, as they became known through the so-called Go Fast video, Greywire reported, which was also attached to the internal email. Gallaudet went on to report that this email, including the video, was later withdrawn by officials.
I learnt at the time that there had also been near misses. So this was and is a question of flight safety, and I could not believe, even if I understood why, that the Navy was not doing anything about it.
Specifically, Gallaudet is literally talking about a cover-up, that is to say, a cover-up of UFO secrets by the U.S. government.
This technology that we have recovered could give us an advantage in military conflicts. So that is a really good reason, first of all, not to disclose these technologies ourselves. So it should not be a question of us revealing all our knowledge about the recovered objects and technologies. However, I think it is time to admit the fact that we are in contact with non-human intelligences. This is something that should be told to the public.
When asked how it could be that he, as a former Navy admiral, speaks of recovered non-human technology as a fact, while parts of the U.S. government still declare that they have never seen credible evidence of it, Gallaudet explained.
What we have before us right now are long-standing classified special programs beyond the oversight of the U.S. Congress and, on the other side, official policy. That is not really going to change.
With his statements, Gallaudet is also backing the Democratic Majority Leader in the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, who, together with his Republican colleague Mike Rounds, expressed disappointment and dismay at the severely limited version of his draft UFO Disclosure Act, UAP Disclosure Act, as part of the U.S. Defense Budget Bill for 2024 NDAA 24, Greywire reported. Gallaudet also calls for controlled disclosure of U.S. UFO secrets.
New UFO revelation from former U.S. Rear Admiral: we are in contact with non-human intelligences.
Photo. Skimmage, Alamy, Mauritius Images. Hand out. AFP.
This actually corresponds to what is real. The truth is and remains indisputable, and also when it is denied or concealed by lies, deceit, and concealment.
And the fact that here on Earth the governments and the militaries actually conceal the effective truth from the peoples, make agreements with other governments of foreign countries behind the people's backs, and bamboozle the peoples with slimy paragraphs. Regulations and laws is what the lowly intelligent of the peoples put up with. This, just as many authorities also harass citizens because their officials simply want to exercise might and curtail the rights of citizens, as the municipality of recently wrote to me. Exercising might and waging war on citizens in an idiotic and cowardly manner, and as a result of being a civil servant, is nasty and does not correspond to courage and balanced management of an office, but rather to bailiwick and borderline piggishness. Such people should be pilloried when the time is right. And the following articles, which were sent to me, reveal that things are also going wrong in the highest government offices.
Little Switzerland is also being closely watched internationally and criticized by editorial team, the 19th of December, 2023.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog and Swiss Foreign Minister Ignacio Cassis at the signing of a Memorandum of Understanding for closer scientific cooperation on the 29th of August, 2022, in Bern.
Ed. Mondovase. Net, an information platform active in the USA that specializes in reporting and commenting on events in Palestine and Israel. has published an appeal by an Arab group calling for an economic boycott of Switzerland in order to dissuade it from its one-sided pro-Israel stance. We are publishing this call to show the Swiss that as citizens of a small country, they too are being watched and occasionally harshly criticized internationally. CM.
At a time when Israel's genocidal war on Gaza is increasingly being condemned internationally, the world has begun to take action to stop the daily massacres of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, most recently with the near-unanimous adoption of a UN General Assembly resolution calling for a ceasefire. However, some international players are not fulfilling their role and obligations. Above all, this also includes Switzerland, which has violated its own neutrality obligation by firmly siding with the perpetrators. For this reason, on 9 December, the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Genocide and the Prevention of this Crime, we, a number of Arab-Palestine solidarity groups, launched a campaign to boycott Switzerland economically for its unprincipled stance and complicity in Israeli war crimes against the Palestinians. For 2 centuries, Switzerland has had a worldwide reputation for being a politically neutral territory and for pursuing a self-imposed policy of neutrality to promote peace, as it claims. In response to this self-portrayal, our campaign, launched by 8 solidarity groups from the Arabian Gulf to the Atlantic Ocean, has sought to expose that far from upholding this supposed neutrality, the Swiss government is in fact complicit in Israel's genocidal war against the human beings in Gaza. Since 7 October, the Swiss government has taken a series of undemocratic measures against its own citizens, completely disregarding freedom of expression in public life, be it in the workplace or in institutions, including high-level academic institutions that are supposed to uphold freedom of expression. These repressive measures have taken the form of intimidation and threats that offenders will be investigated for anti-Semitism. Public pressure demands that the official Israeli view be adopted unfiltered and without independent scrutiny. This encourages anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and Islamophobic discourse in Switzerland by using the state media as a platform for misleading Israeli propaganda. The Swiss Confederation has exacerbated the persecution of Palestinians by canceling agreements with 3 Palestinian civil rights organizations and by designating Hamas as a terrorist organization, thereby further criminalizing it. On the other hand, it has doubled its moral and financial support for Israel. For example, the Canton of Zurich publicly announced a generous donation of CHF $500,000 from its charity fund to support the Israeli foundation Ha'emuta Lekidum Toshevei Hevel Eshkol, on the grounds that the money will benefit the survivors of the terrorist attacks in Israel and the reconstruction of their villages. At a time when 85% of the buildings in the Gaza Strip are either partially or completely destroyed, no such gesture has been made to the Palestinians, also after more than 2 months of destructive warfare. Furthermore, the Swiss Confederation has displayed a conspicuous double standard by condemning the 7th of October attack, but failing to issue a statement condemning Israel's aggression against Gaza and the ongoing genocide in Palestine documented by independent experts. In doing so, it ignored the killing of 20,000 Palestinians, 45% of whom are children. This double standard is underpinned by the fact that Switzerland continues to maintain economic and military relations, also unnoticed, with the war machine of the Israeli occupation.
Military relations.
In 2015, Switzerland ordered 6 Hermes 900 HFE drones from the Israeli company Elbit Systems, the same model that is also used to bomb the Gaza Strip, at a price of USD $326 million. 4 years later, A new contract was signed with Elbit and a cooperation agreement was signed with the state-owned Swiss weapons manufacturer RUAG. In return, the Swiss Department of Defense DDPS brokered counter deals with around 40 Swiss companies that used Swiss expertise to expand and perfect the combat drone. The Swiss flagship university, EPFL, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, is involved in the counter-trade deals arranged by the DDPS. Its sister university, ETH Zurich, on the other hand, is involved in a €65 million research project on aircraft technologies together with the Israeli defense company IAI. Unsurprisingly, the prestigious Swiss university ETH, which is involved in unethical cooperation with the settler state, has actively ensured that critical voices among its students and faculty are silenced for merely reporting facts or conducting critical academic research on Palestine while failing to provide them with security and support. Even more frightening is that the Israeli company Verint, founded by a former agent of the Mossad and the Israeli Army's Unit 8200, supplies wiretapping systems to the Federal Ministry of Justice and the police. In 2021, RTS revealed that the Swiss authorities also use Israeli spy software, Pegasus, in their investigations. It is estimated that between 1996 and 2005, Switzerland purchased a total of over $500 million worth of military equipment from Israel. But Switzerland does not limit itself to the purchase of military equipment. It also contributes to war material through the sale of military equipment such as tanks, aircraft, equipment, and ammunition. In the past, state-owned and private Swiss companies have collaborated with Israeli partners in the development of cluster munitions, drones, reconnaissance systems, INTAF, and other products. In the 5 years between 2008 and 2013, Switzerland made sales to Israel in the categories of war material and military equipment.
Economic ties.
Apart from military relations, Israel is Switzerland's third most important trading partner in the Middle East. Regular economic relations and cooperation have existed since the state was founded in 1948, and a free trade agreement has been in place since 1993. Switzerland has not linked these trade agreements or any other official cooperation with Israel to compliance with the Geneva Conventions, or Israel's respect for international law and human rights. Although Switzerland calls for a two-state solution, it does not prohibit such economic relations, exclude any company from funding, or warn them not to operate in the occupied Palestinian territories or trade in settlement goods, a violation of international law against which even the EU has taken concrete measures. Among the arguments of our campaign are the following. Switzerland has concluded multi-million-dollar deals with Israeli arms and security companies such as Elbit and Verint, and at least 7 Swiss companies are involved in activities in the occupied Palestinian territories, including Liebherr, Nestlé, Osem, HBI Herter AG, Lonza, Parappa AG, Tyco International, Von Roll Transformers. As Switzerland is a member and depositary state of the Geneva Convention, it must take a stronger stance in response to Israeli violations of international law and the Geneva Conventions. As Switzerland adheres to its principle of neutrality to this day, it is obliged to fulfill the requirements of a neutral state. If the Swiss Confederation really does support the peace in the Middle East that it claims to advocate, it must immediately call for a ceasefire in the occupied Gaza Strip and an end to the blockade. It must recognize the suffering and oppression of the Palestinian people, call on Israel to abide by international law, end the occupation, and publicly demand the abolition of the apartheid system that Israel has established against the Palestinians. In official statements, Switzerland repeatedly mentions Israel's right to defend itself, completely overlooking the fact that over 20,000 Palestinians have been killed since 7th of October. According to international law and various UN General Assembly resolutions, Palestinians have the right to self-defense and to resist occupation and colonization, also through armed struggle. Switzerland must therefore withdraw the criminalization of Palestinian groups that engage in this legitimate resistance against the occupation and colonization of their country. Furthermore, a country that invokes its neutrality must not have military exchanges with a military power that illegally occupies foreign land. The Swiss Confederation must end all military cooperation with Israel, Israeli weapons and security companies, and make all its dealings with Israel conditional on Israel's compliance with international law, human rights, and the Geneva Conventions. The Swiss Confederation must also take measures to prevent Swiss companies from profiting from the Israeli occupation or trading in products from the settlements, a policy that even the EU is pursuing. We firmly believe that our campaign is a crucial step in making Switzerland's involvement in the region transparent to the public and ensuring that Switzerland is not complicit in violations of international law, and that its unrestricted support and funding of the occupation of Palestine is ended. We call on the Arab states and the international community as a whole to withdraw their investments in Switzerland immediately, to stop tourism to Switzerland, and to suspend economic relations with the country. The Arab world is responsible for 4.9% of Switzerland's total export earnings, while the GCC countries alone account for 3.5%. Arab tourism in Switzerland fills Swiss coffers with almost $500 million a year and might account for more than 5% of all hotel overnight stays. In 2021, the UAE alone had capital investments in Switzerland totaling CHF 1.335 billion USD 1.450 billion. In 2022, 5 Arab countries were among the top 30 markets for Swiss watch exports, accounting for CHF 2.07 billion, or 8.3% of the total Swiss watch export share. Just days after the launch, the Swiss Confederation not only abandoned its call for an immediate ceasefire, but escalated its stance even further by cutting aid to the leading UN aid organization in Gaza, UNRWA, at a time when its commitment to the survival of the bombed Palestinians is crucial. The reaction to Switzerland's positioning in the form of an organized boycott could lead to significant financial losses, as the Arab world is responsible for 4.9% of Switzerland's total export revenues. Countries involved in the systematic ethnic cleansing of Palestinians by the settler colonial state of Israel must be held accountable. The boycott is undoubtedly an important tool to put pressure on these governments to stop their illegal aid to Israel. To the original article on the U.S.-American platform Mondoweiss in English, with some additional illustrations and links to the sources. Global Bridge. Each has not verified the Swiss government measures and economic figures cited in this article. The translation was done by Christian Müller. The fact that the Swiss government, the Federal Council, is currently not honoring Switzerland's historical neutrality, for example, with the scandalous blanket adoption of EU sanctions against Russia, is also the observation and analysis of the editor of the Global Bridge. Platform Christian Müller. Switzerland is predestined to play a mediating role in international conflicts. He therefore counsels the signing of the so-called Neutrality Initiative so that a referendum on this important point in Swiss foreign policy must be held.
The EU sets the pace. Switzerland follows behind Markus Müglin, the 21.12. 2023.
Europe's foreign judges have long been shaping the lives of human beings in Switzerland, even if this is usually suppressed. Brussels, Strasbourg and Luxembourg set the pace, Switzerland follows behind. This is how European law expert Matthias Hirsch characterizes the relationship. between the institutions of the EU and Switzerland. He also succinctly summarizes the way and extent to which European customary law is spreading in Switzerland today. Quietly, but with a big impact.
Foreign judges have long been at work.
What sounds harmless on the cover of the new publication by the European law expert from the University of Zurich, entitled The EC of A in Switzerland, proves to be the antithesis of common fantasies of reality in Switzerland in the 230 pages of the book. The supposedly foreign judges have long since arrived in this country. Their judgments are significant for human beings in Switzerland to a much greater extent than is well known. However, the blame is not to be laid at the door of foreign judges. Rather, the unequal relationship is self-inflicted. The author Matthias Ursch's evidence for this reality, which is usually suppressed in this country, is rich in facts. He reveals a multifaceted network of relationships between EU law, numerous judgments of the European Court of Justice ECJ, and the development of Swiss law as well as many judgments of Swiss courts. He examines a large number of judgments on a variety of different issues. On the free movement of persons, fundamental freedoms, equality between men and women, family reunification, access to social welfare, the treatment of asylum seekers, recognition as refugees, data protection and sanctions. He reproduces the reasons for the judgments, relates them to European law and European judgments, and is thus able to show how EU law now permeates Swiss law in its entire breadth and depth.
Switzerland's Europeanization along winding paths.
Several reasons pave the way for the Europeanization of Switzerland.
Firstly, there is the primacy of European law, analogous to the primacy of international law over national law.
An example of this is the judgment of the Federal Supreme Court in 2015 on the issue of the free movement of persons. It stated that the primacy of international law also applies without exception in relation to the European Union and the obligations entered into by Switzerland under the Treaty on the Free Movement of Persons. National law may not deviate from the agreement reached with the EU. The Federal Supreme Court has also extended the unconditional primacy of European law to the Dublin Asylum Agreement, to which Switzerland allowed itself to be bound through its association with the Schengen Agreement. There is also the Brussels effect, which has led to the EU reflex in Switzerland. Switzerland has been systematically aligning its legislation with EU norms and standards for a good 30 years. EU compatibility is their watchword. Legislation that is modelled in this way has an impact on case law, for example on competition law. As Swiss antitrust law is strongly orientated towards European competition law, European practice must also be taken into account, argued the Federal Supreme Court in a ruling. Sometimes European case law also prevails in Switzerland without a new legal basis. Wesch cites the Google judgment from 2014 on the right to be forgotten on the internet. The tech giant then also implemented the requirements of the European judgment in this country.
A little consolation nonetheless.
At least European law expert Esch offers some consolation to the sovereignty ideologues. Not everything is covered by European law. A prominent example is the Free Trade Agreement concluded more than 50 years ago, which is limited to the reduction of customs duties and quotas in the movement of goods. It therefore aims for a less far-reaching degree of integration than the individual bilateral agreements, which is why the primacy of European law does not apply in this context. Wesch also identifies certain room for manoeuvre in the agreement on the free movement of persons that has not yet been utilised. In its 2015 ruling, the Federal Supreme Court only commented on the supranational nature of the agreement, but ignored Switzerland's special position as a third country in the European integration process. and did not ask whether Switzerland could deny European primacy in exceptional cases. He also argues in favour of this. It would lead to an overly far-reaching alignment with the member states if any room for deviations from internal market law were excluded take court. Individual agreements, for which cornerstones were defined in the recently concluded exploratory talks with the EU, and which will soon be negotiated, offer the opportunity to achieve legally binding exceptions. Concrete claims to sovereignty can thus be safeguarded against legal takeovers on the quiet. However, the national leeway postulated by European law expert Uesch does not change the overall picture. ECJ judgments are omnipresent in everyday Swiss law. Campus Europe activists from the world of financial billionaires and other EU skeptics may lament the threat of foreign judges for as long as they like. European law has a much greater impact on everyday life in Switzerland than fantasies of sovereignty would have us believe.
That effectively corresponds to what we have analyzed. According to our findings, the European Union is a form of insidious dictatorship from which Switzerland should steer clear in every wise and remove those persons from positions of state leadership who are ingratiating and friendly to this dictatorship. A connection with this strongly dictatorial union and its supporters, which unfortunately also affects Swiss citizens, is associated with the very great danger that, as a result of confused and illogical thinking and a false view of the truth as well as impaired reason, reason will fail completely, and it will not be recognized that a closer connection with this dictatorship will lead to the end of neutrality and the dictatorship of Switzerland.
That is probably to be feared, because the lowly intelligent and therefore non-thinking idiots who are friendly to the EU dictatorship and do not see what it actually is, as they can also not only guess, and believe that the new times require a new behavior of united courses of action, would lead to Switzerland becoming as dictatorial as the EU dictatorship.
To which, unfortunately, the beginnings have already been created by leaders of the Swiss state who were falsely elected to their offices.
In my opinion, such rulers are nothing other than traitors to the country, and also those of the people who drag out of government with those false 50s who are only Swiss on paper, but not in their convictions. I vow to Mr., as well as his wife and son, our neighbors in Niederflachs, bought-in Germans who were extremely strict about Switzerland, and also defended it in every respect.
Svath also wrote about that because you were friends with the son from whose father you also learnt the trade of...
Yes, that was the case, and I then worked for a while as an adult. But what I want to ask you, because I keep getting asked about it, what does democracy mean to you?
In a democracy, only the people decide. Courts are also subject to the people in this respect, so a judgment is only valid with their consent. In our case, the committee represents the people. Every item on the agenda is submitted to the individual peoples before it is presented by their representatives, who form the committee, and the decision is made in favor or against. No state leadership is authorized to decide, order, or implement anything independently without the consent of the people. A real democracy, therefore, requires completely different prerequisites and a completely different process than is erroneously understood and practiced on Earth. Because what is realized in so-called democratic states on Earth effectively corresponds not to democratic values, but to misleading partial democratic values, while the other part corresponds to a principle of domination and even part of a dictatorship. This is also the case in your home country of Switzerland. This state is only partly run by popular vote, while another part is self-determining in terms of rule, and another part is even dictatorial, completely excluding the people. This is unjustified, especially as regards negotiations and decisions with other states, whereby the pros and cons are also not considered in the necessary wise as would be indispensable. This is done because those involved in governance are incapable of their office and governance, because they lack the experience and ability to do so, which requires practical aptitude and skill as well as life experience, and these high values cannot be acquired in a short 4, 8, or 12 years. Thus, state leadership requires that the corresponding personalities who have to cope with it, according to the lifetime of human beings on Earth, have a decisive life experience of at least 57 to 60 years, in absolute exceptions younger and with recognizably acceptable leadership skills, before they are elected to state leadership. For a semi-democratic state like Switzerland, the people should be careful not to elect any persons without significant life experience to any auxiliary offices of state leadership who do not have at least 40 years of life experience. A human being with insufficient life experience and not equipped with the necessary leadership skills should never be elected to an office of state leadership or an auxiliary office of state leadership.
Aha, but what can I understand by state leadership auxiliary office?
An auxiliary leadership placed before a state leadership and practically advising or instructing it, for a state leadership should never be formed without such an auxiliary leadership, which is also familiar with the people and their interests.
Like the National Council and the Council of States in our country, for example, which are actually supposed to represent the people.
That may be the case with you.
That is probably the case, if I am not mistaken. But here's another letter to me for a change.
Dear Christian, forwarded message Salome Billy here, at the request of a forwarded thank you. Greetings. Subject: a letter to Billy. Date 2/19. Dec 2023. 2254 009 0800 from K-Dah.
Good day to you, Christian. Hope all is well with you and the family. Best regards. Here is a letter I would like for Billy to read, and I was wondering if you could forward it to him. Thank you and Salome. Dear Billy, the messenger, I would like to thank you again. I have known for a while that you are telling the truth, and that is why I follow the teachings of creation energy. It is truly amazing to read about ourselves from the eyes of a prophet of old, describing exactly what we do. At least to me it is obvious. I just wanted to let you know that your teachings are working. I can proudly say I am a human being. So thank you.
That is gratifying.
It is. Then I heard on TV that in Germany alone, a woman is physically assaulted by her husband, boyfriend or former husband or boyfriend every 4 minutes. But nothing was said about the fact that many of them are beaten to death or suffer for the rest of their lives. Perhaps the singer's politeness prevails in this respect.
To the contrary, that is not pleasing.
Of course not. But it does not make sense to me that women tie themselves to guys like that, by whom they are then beaten up and maltreated or even killed. There should be enough time before a wedding, or simply when they are together, for women to first thoroughly find out what kind of man they are committing to. But unfortunately, this is not usually done. Instead, offspring are simply produced, which then makes marriage compulsory for many. Alcohol also often plays a big role in the whole thing, which leads to violence and sooner or later to disaster in the marriage. This, as well as wild ideas and fantasies, which ultimately lead to misery or fights and even murder and manslaughter.
I guess you are right. But since I have been here on Earth and learning a lot about what humanity uses here, what they call thinking, logic, understanding, and reason, that makes me doubt that what you say is understood.
Yes, it will be few and far between, I realize that.
I suppose it will be.
Then I have this question for you, which I actually wanted to put to Ptah, but I am sure you can also guess. It is about the fact that I was asked by Michael if I should talk to an American he knows, I forget his name, about the foreigners who are traveling around in their UFOs, and, to be honest, this is what do you think? It also contradicts what Svath and Simya say told me I talked to Ptah about it, and that is why I wanted to talk to him again. But now that he does not want to come until next year, I will ask you, what do you think? I am really not comfortable with it because...
What you think, you should stick to that. And as for Ptah, I cannot contact him until I am back at the station. When I have contacted him, then I can tell him what your concerns are, and come back to report to you what his advice is, which will probably be the same as you have taken for yourself. The opposite would this also corresponds to my view, which is the same as yours. If you were to give information, you could promise yourself in spite of all caution, then it would have the probable consequence that...
Exactly, so that is what I think. So let us leave it, and you can save yourself the call to Ptah. But now I still have to explain something about so-called rebirth, and also about the dimensions, because some things are unclear in this respect. Rebirth is a term for the fact that human beings are supposed to be reborn after they die, as the traditional false doctrine claims. Siddhartha Gautama is said to have invented this false doctrine, although the causes of the false doctrine of rebirth lie in Hinduism, but according to the Buddhist view, are based in the three unwholesome roots of karma, in greed, hatred, and ignorance, that is to say, delusion, whereby both religions assume that the life of human beings is unlimited, and continues after death through a new birth, and thus through a series of rebirths, that is to say, reincarnations. The idea of rebirth in this respect is that individual life is not limited by birth and death, but that human beings are reborn as human beings in a rebirth and lead a new life, depending on the positive or negative things they have achieved in life, the result of which is called karma. By rebirth, the believer understands the new birth of human beings through their entering into and leading a new life, and thus also a new relationship with God. This is actually a false doctrine of the last things, namely death and what comes after it, a reconciliation of this world and the hereafter, so to speak. This is reduced to a simple denominator of understanding, although it is presented as complicated as possible for the believers so that they do not understand it and feel important and clever. Rebirth in the sense of Hinduism and Buddhism, also in certain esoteric circles, does not exist because the human body and its entire organism decays through decomposition. That which forms and animates the consciousness and thus the personality, but also animates the body and thus all the organs, is the creation life energy, which is stored in a level of the various multiple energies of creation until it is called up again to animate the consciousness of a new personality of a human being. To understand this, it should be explained that the creation life energy forms the consciousness itself, and at the same time explicitly forms the personality, which is formed through learning. In the realm of the creation energy level, countless absolutely similar energy forms of the most diverse evolutionary stages linger, which are then called up again when they have to animate an absolutely new corresponding personality and its consciousness in the 21st day after conception. This is then an absolutely new and different personality that in no wise has anything to do with the previous and deceased personality. It remains solely and solely now, and for all time, as it has been since its origin of becoming, creation life energy, which evolves through all the efforts of the respective animating personality, from one life existence to the next life existence, until creation one day transforms itself into a higher form of creation, and evolves independently in endless duration. Consequently, there are no longer any human beings with personalities in it who are animated by creation life energy in their consciousness. So it is hereby clarified that there is no rebirth in the sense imagined by the mad religious mania of Hinduism, Buddhism, and other evil beliefs. What recurs and inevitably revives a new personality and its consciousness is and remains at all times solely and exclusively the absolutely and in every respect neutral creation life energy, which with each new revival neutrally revives an absolutely new personality and allows it to develop independently and on its own responsibility, or to evolve according to its own judgment, will, and knowledge. This happens in a recurring form, which, for lack of another term, can perhaps also be called coming back or rebirth, because the creation life energy always comes back, that is to say, returns and revitalizes new personalities, as taught by Emmanuel and Siddhartha Gautama, but falsified by know-it-alls after their death. If I now talk about the dimensions, I would like to explain that they can be broken and traveled in our space-time continuum, in the present, as well as in the past and the future. However, it is different with regard to the other dimensions of other universes in the 7 dimensions, that is to say, 7 universes of creation, in which the visible cosmos is only the material belt of the 7 levels of the unimaginable and comprehensive vastness of a universe. The other creation universes, which exist in different dimensions within creation, have completely different dimensional densities, which means that it is not possible to simply switch from one universe to another. However, if this is to be done, various technical achievements are required to make it possible. Therefore, when the Pleiaren come to Earth, a transformation is required that allows them to exist materially in the dimension, that is to say, in the dimensions of this universe of creation, which is also the case for their flying apparatus or beam ships, which have no relation to the so-called UFOs. So these are the most urgent explanations I have to give, so that some things are better understood, and that the Pleiaren have absolutely nothing to do with the so-called UFOs of foreigners, which they have always been very careful not to come into contact with, or also to allow themselves to be located.
That is good of you to say. But that is enough for today. I still have something to say, but it must remain private.